Well, in mainland Southeast Asia in particular, it's really widespread. Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, you have a lot of land acquisition happening. Basically, somebody wants the land for a project, like a hotel or like setting up a factory. They talk to the government. In the case of Myanmar and in Vietnam, often it's the military or other ministries, and set a price. The people are then asked to leave. A lot of it is used by farmers and been occupied by farmers for centuries. They're reluctant to leave. Yeah, sometimes it's done with more finesse and more generosity than in other times. Sometimes people really don't want to leave, and that becomes a problem. In Laos, the one incident that grabbed everybody's attention in recent times is where farmers were being moved from their land for a Chinese development project. The farmers stood up to the government, stood in front of caterpillars and refused to let them bulldoze their houses and everything away to start the construction, and then managed to take video of themselves on smartphones and send it around the world. We knew there were problems. Certainly there have been problems, but one of the first times that protesters actually managed to use social media to get their story out of Laos. One of the major dynamics in Myanmar is the fact that people can now protest, while back in the day that they ended up in prison, and so they did it, but not as often as they do it now. In cases like the famous copper mine in central Myanmar, what happened is that it was taken over in a project by a joint venture between a Chinese company and a Myanmar military company. 4 villages were effectively dislocated. People protested. They'd received very little compensation. They got really upset. They refused to leave. The police were finally sent in to dislodge them, and it got rather ugly. People were injured. But then they did manage to force some changes. The split was changed from a majority Chinese company to a majority Myanmar company. And what else happened is they were urged and agreed to do more compensation. Well, Cambodia, like some of its neighbors, also has a lot of problems on the land situation. In the last few years or so, about 400,000 families that have been dislodged from their land. Some cases there has been decent compensation, many cases not. And so it has resulted in lots of protests. In some cases it's put down fairly violently. There is the famous case of the land around a lake that's in the suburbs, now increasingly inside Phnom Penh, that has resulted in considerable protests that have resulted in the arrests of people. Well, Vietnam also has a problem of land acquisition. This has probably been going on a little longer because Vietnam, than some of its neighbors, Vietnam started the reform process earlier. We had the famous case of a farmer about 2 years ago in the northeastern city of Haiphong, the big port city, where the shrimp farmer had land. He kept expanding, and at some point the government wanted access to that land for a project. He refused to leave. He had weapons and fought back, and some people were injured, and the upshot was that in the end he was sentenced to, I believe it was 6 or 7 years in prison. He's in prison as we speak. But this was one of the highest profile cases in Vietnam. It was one of the first cases of a land acquisition protest by basically one guy and his family that got wild social media coverage, government media coverage. Became an incident that the government realized, including the Prime Minister, realized they had to address, but it didn't end that well.